Welcome back. So before we went to the break, we ended with taking a look at the details of our specific objects, Kubernetes objects, that we can put limits on. So let's continue on and realizing that if you had put some type of limit, either specific object types in Kubernetes, or maybe I put some limits up here on CPU, RAM, storage, etc. This we're looking at is in our vSphere client. Our customers, the people using this in a lot of cases, are going to be our developers or people that are deploying applications in the infrastructure. We're typically maybe not going to want them to have the vSphere HTML client access. How would they be seeing this? And oh, by the way, this is how they're used to seeing it. They're going to be using the kubectl CLI. And as I said to you before the break, each of those limits that we could potentially be setting on respective objects would be defined natively in Kubernetes objects, this thing called the resource quota. And the team that's using the kubectl CLI can actually see that by simply doing a kubectl get resource quotas. They could describe their resource quotas and they could actually see, hey, I've got a limit here that's been set. They could see the storage policies in use. And if I had set memory, CPU, RAM, object limits, it would all show up for them right here when they're using their kubectl describe commands on their resource quotas. As I said, you can set permissions. Those permissions are going to be displayed for you here on the permissions tab of your namespace. When we're defining permissions from the vSphere client perspective, we're really defining, I'm going to say, half of their permissions. There's two parts of doing permissions. One is from the vSphere with Tanzu perspective, and we're only going to give them two potential roles. The roles are either they can edit, which means they can make some type of change to the namespace, or they could view it, which is basically a read-only. Obviously, they can't make any other change. The second half of the equation is what can they do inside the Kubernetes platform inside that namespace. That would actually be defined using your Kubernetes RBAC manifest, the role-based access control, RBAC. And if you look inside the Kubernetes IO documentation, you will see that that's a very granular opportunity for you. You're going to actually define different objects or API groups. You can define what we refer to as verbs. Can they read? Can they edit? Can they delete? Etc. That's all defined inside Kubernetes. And to truly put permissions onto a namespace, you need to do both. We're just showing you here from the vSphere perspective, if you want somebody to actually do something besides just looking at a Kubernetes cluster and a specific namespace inside of it, if you want them to do more than that, you would have to give them the edit role. And then what they can do in Kubernetes, you would define using a Kubernetes RBAC manifest file. When things are happening inside this Kubernetes cluster that you've set up, and somebody's gained access to their namespace in your Kubernetes cluster, and let's say they decide they want to deploy a deployment that's going to have a series of pods, maybe load balancer, etc. inside of it. When they do their kubectl apply command in that case, a series of Kubernetes events are going to trigger. Okay, we're going to end up somehow inside there. The API server is going to get the manifest. It needs to go ahead and persist this to the etcd database. It needs to consult the scheduler to say, scheduler, which worker node should I put that on? I need to start the deployment, create a pod, let the container runtime engine know, deploy this container in this pod. All those events are going to be happening, these Kubernetes events. And if you're troubleshooting a problem or you want to see what's going on with something, you would typically get the Kubernetes events. And again, instead of having you go into the kubectl get events, we're going to expose the exact same events you would have gotten instead of using a kubectl command. We're going to show it to you here on the monitor tab of your namespace. These are the same Kubernetes events that you could have gained access to using the kubectl command. As we're doing things in Kubernetes, potentially it could cause vSphere to react to something. And you could see any vSphere related events that are happening for this particular namespace, right? There could be a correlation between the two. Maybe I'm spinning up a pod, which is going to result in a vSphere pod. That's getting deployed. Well, over on the vSphere side, we're going to be doing corresponding events to basically take a VM, let's say, from a gray unknown state to a green state because we've powered it on. You would see those events if you clicked on the vSphere tab over there. So before we start our lab, I want to go ahead and wrap this lesson up. First of all, we've talked about using vSphere with Tanzu namespaces. This is a Kubernetes namespace, but what we're saying is create it via the vSphere client, and we're going to give you the graphical user interface to be able to do all the editing of your settings, which is much easier than having to deal with Kubernetes manifest files. So we talked about the process. We also told you can do resource management in the namespace. And this is the equivalent to a resource quota in Kubernetes. But again, we're just exposing it easier for you using a simple graphical user interface, the HTML5 client. And then we also talked about doing access control. So to help you further absorb that, we're going to go ahead and jump into our next lab here, which is going to be actually creating the namespace. So there's really no tricks or gotchas inside this one. It's a pretty straightforward a set of instructions. You're going to end up accessing the vSphere client. You're going to navigate to the appropriate steps to get you to where you can create the namespace. Again, the steps are in your lab guide. We're going to go ahead and configure permissions and storage on that namespace. And then we're actually going to go ahead and log in with our kubectl command and do some commands and show you what you could see there. So let's go ahead, get started on the lab, and I'll see you in the next module where we're going to be talking about a very exciting thing, talking more details about the pod service. Alrighty,